Home to give us his reaction from the Tory flanks. Thank you so much for joining me on the programme. I mean, firstly, what's your reaction to Liz Truss's speech? I mean, do you think that she came across as confident and self-assured, or is she still quite worried?
I mean, I think it was a pretty good speech by Liz Truss's standards. She's nobody's idea of a standout orator, but it was good, and especially after those protesters really rallied the crowd to her side. But I really don't think it did what she needed to do. Unfortunately, things have happened in the wrong order. If this speech had happened before the mini-budget and it had been part of a broader attempt to reassure her MPs and backbenchers and the voters about what her economic plan was going to be, it might have been a good speech. But unfortunately, because the mini-budget had already happened, what she actually needed to do was reassure those MPs that she's going to get a grip on the country and stabilise that position in the polls. And I'm afraid I don't think they're going to do that. In fact, from when I'm speaking to people at Tory conference, they're more worried because in just a few weeks, the Chancellor is going to have, in theory, to find tens of billions of pounds worth of spending cuts to balance those tax cuts. They don't think he can do it. They think that there's much more to come.
Moments for you in regards to the conference. I mean, Home Secretary Suella Braverman seemed to spark a lot of discussions about some of the things that she said about immigration and so on. Did that attract you?
I mean, so ConservativeHome runs a full suite of events at party conference. So I'm afraid I was marching from one to the other, chairing most of them. So I was very much a ghost at the feast at Conservative Party conference. But I think for me, actually, the most interesting thing was when I was talking to people, when I managed to get away, when I got into the bars and some of the receptions, talking to MPs and advisors behind the scenes and getting an impression of what the mood was inside the government, because it was absolutely fascinating. Just the sheer number of Tory MPs and strategists who are pricing into their calculations about the next general election the idea that Liz Truss won't be leading the Conservatives at that point. It's an absolutely remarkable finding when you remember that she was elected barely sort of a month, 2 months ago.
And, you know, we have heard things from Grant Shapps and Michael Gove and so on. I mean, have you been worried about some of the more rebellious discussions that have gone on, or do you think that this is expected given that she is trailing so far behind in the polls right now?
I mean, I think Liz Truss should absolutely be worried by the level of dissent currently visible in the ranks of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, because it means it's not just about whether or not they get rid of her. That's the important thing to remember. That's a very big step to take. But her delivering on her programme, that growth plan that she's outlined, that she and the Chancellor have committed to, does depend on the votes of Conservative MPs. And it only takes about 35 of them to vote with the opposition to torpedo anything that they try to do. That's what killed off the 45p rate cut, but that could potentially kill off everything. If you talk to the Treasury spads, they're thinking they're going to find the Chancellor's spending cuts from the spending departments. The only way you can get tens of billions of pounds worth of cuts is from the big departments. But if you go and talk to education, health, work and pensions, none of them are expecting the government to successfully get cuts through the House of Commons. So no, the lack of loyalty and discipline from Tory MPs should be very concerning for anyone in Downing Street hoping that Liz Truss can deliver her economic agenda.
I mean, do you think people may be being too hard on the Prime Minister? I mean, it's only been a matter of weeks. I mean, she inherited a very challenging situation, whether that's the consequences of the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, also the backlog of COVID and so on. I mean, do you think people are being too hard on her?
Not necessarily. I think obviously there's a lot of wisdom to the basic Truss premise that we need growth. That's absolutely true. The UK economy has not been growing strongly for a long time. Stronger growth means that on the same tax level, we get more money for public services, workers get to take more money home, and so on. But I think even amongst people who support Liz Truss's economics, there's real anger about how badly this has been done, about the fact that she didn't take the time to reassure MPs, to square off the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility, about the fact that despite announcing a huge packet of what could have been quite popular measures, especially the energy package, which we have not talked about enough, she and the Chancellor led on a couple of very, very unpopular measures, such as the 45p tax rate. And of course, every Tory MP is angry about the fact that it seems, based on the polling, that this last couple of weeks has just thrown needlessly the next election, which was a very winnable election if they had focused mostly on delivering the 2019 manifesto.
And how do you think that she can turn this around now? I mean, some observers are saying that she's hoping for, short-term pain for long-term gain, and some of the benefits of the policies that she has instituted will be the beneficiary of them in the coming months. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think the problem with that is, again, she's right in that any pro-growth strategy would involve short-term disruption, and the long-term benefits would be worth it. But there are a couple of problems with that. The first is there's no point having a long-term plan if it won't get you past the next election. And I think that a lot of Tory MPs are looking at the time it takes to bring legislation through the House of Commons, which is, up to a year, and then the amount of time they'll have left before the election. And they're just thinking these policies, even if they're right, aren't going to have time to take effect before we're facing the voters in 2024. The other problem is that the two things, whatever you think of them on other grounds, the two things that would really kickstart growth and would get you perhaps up to that 2.5% growth figure is either hugely increasing immigration or taking the brakes off house building, building millions of homes, helping to build railways, infrastructure, and so on. Now, for different reasons, the Conservative Party and its voters do not like either of those options. So there's actually not much prospect at all of getting to 2.5% growth. So I think what MPs are worried about is the idea that this programme is going to amount to quite a lot of pain, but for very little gain, at least by 2024.